Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Called to Love podcast, where we discuss all things adoption and foster care and dive into the practical, the clinical, and most importantly, the biblical perspectives to help you and your family thrive. I'm Summer Colbert, adopted mom, director of adoption and foster ministry, and champion for the Arkansas Baptist Children and Family Ministries. Adoption and foster care aren't just a process. They are both unique invitations to go on a journey with the Lord, where you will experience life-changing opportunities to grow in your faith and learn to love in an entirely new way. One thing is for sure, being called to love means you will never be the same. Welcome, friends, to the Called to Love podcast. I'm so grateful that you're here today, and I am especially excited to welcome today's guest, as we are going to be talking about a topic that affects many couples right now who are seeking to grow their families, and this is the topic of infertility. And joining me for this conversation are authors and founders of Waiting in Hope, Jenn Hesse and Kelley Ramsey. Ladies, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Now, both of you have your own personal experience with infertility, giving you expertise on this topic, but you also speak with and serve countless others who have this shared experience. And I really feel like this can be a silent struggle. It's a very vulnerable struggle to go through infertility, and everybody has their own unique experience with that. And so let me just ask right off the bat, how common is infertility in our society today?
Oh, super common. I think a few years ago it was 1 in 8, but now they've changed it to 1 in 6 couples will face infertility. But with 1 in 4 having miscarriage or loss, the number is a lot higher because miscarriage is attached to infertility, even if you're not struggling. You know, if you can get pregnant and you don't carry, it's still very similar.
That's a great point.
So
yeah,
it's high.
It's such a hard thing. It is. So with that, you're seeing, I mean, I think especially going out and about, you're trying to function in society, you're trying to get through your day, but people are carrying this terrible weight and this grief and just a lot of heartache with that. And so often the pain is too deep to even give words to. So I'd like to ask each of you to take a moment to share your own infertility journeys in a way that, and put words to it in a way that maybe our listeners can relate to and for the first time.
Yeah, it is. It's hard. It's a journey. That's kind of the metaphor that we use in the book. And one of the other ways to describe it to someone who's like, not experienced it themselves. But if you have, you can totally relate to the roller coaster of emotions that you experience every month. Because you just go through this time of, oh, your hopes are raising at the beginning of your monthly cycle, and like, this could be it. And then you're probably doing things to try and make sure, the best possible scenario, like, for this to happen. And then you have to wait like 2 weeks. The 2-week wait is brutal. Where you're just worrying about like every little thing. Could this symptom be, mean pregnancy, or could it mean like my period is coming, or, and it's a lot of wondering. And then, you get to the end and it's a negative pregnancy test, and then you're just like plummeting into disappointment and wondering like, is this ever going to happen? So it is a wild, wild ride, but then you continue to get on it over and over again because of that deep longing and God-given longing for a child.
Yeah. And no matter what your journey is, because we all have very different stories in this, it's the same feelings of hope, 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 let down, hope, 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 let down. Or the waiting is so long and so consistent that you get weary from it. I mean, I know Jenn and I, when we connected, we were on a different part in our journey. But we were still like, you still feel those feelings of, of the tiredness, of the exhaustion from waiting and hoping. And And for us, both of us were very lonely and isolated until we found community, until we found a place to be known and seen and understood. And I went through infertility for a year with just my husband and some close friends who knew, but they weren't going through it. And I thought I was the only one. And that's the prickly part, is like, that's what hurts the most, is you really do think in isolation that you're it. Like, you don't see the others,
Right.
you just see the one. And quietly, they're all around you. Like, when you're sitting at a table and I speak and people are at tables, I'm like, one of you is within infertility right now, in secondary infertility, or has had a loss. Like, odds are one or two of you. And that's hard to realize, and people don't want to talk about it. And so it's just, it's lonely.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And it's really difficult to know when you haven't experienced that, how to speak into that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit into our conversation. But I love what you said, Kelley, about community. And so I want to ask, because you're in Texas and Jen is in Oregon. So, but the Lord somehow brought you two together and he orchestrated this friendship, which led to a community, which has led to a ministry. Tell me a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah, well, going through my own infertility journey, this is Kelley. My husband and I were like, we can't be the only ones. So we asked our church at the time, there's got to be more. And lo and behold, we said, we'll help and do whatever. And they were like, well, it's actually needed. So why don't you help start a support group for infertility? And I said, okay, let's do this Bible study, even though we didn't have anything to study. And this group, and there was 3 people I knew within my own like Sunday school class, because that's the kind of church I went to at the time. And we were all there. Nobody knew that we were all going through it. And then this community just formed, and we started trying to find things to read and to look into and how to be hopeful. And then the name came of what we'd be. And from there, it just grew and grew. And my husband and I decided to hold an event in between actually pregnancies. And miscarriages. And we held an event because the Lord like woke me up in the middle of the night, and I was like, oh no, I was on a stage. I hate stages. Okay. And so we did it. And lo and behold, people came from everywhere in Houston. And I was like, oh, wow, this is what we have to do. They all need support. And when men are crying in front of you, because I've never gotten to talk to anyone, it's like, oh yeah, we really have to do this. And so that's where Waiting in Hope Ministries was actually born, and started from there. And then I started at some point stalking Jen, and we were like, we were speaking the same voice, and had the same mindset and heart. And I was just like, yes. So I reached out to her numerous times. And finally, I think I bugged her enough that she's like, okay, maybe we do this together. I mean, her approach and how that all went might be different. The Lord did it. And what's crazy is through social media, we have this friendship that I can't imagine not having. And the Lord called us to write this book, Waiting in Hope, the devotional. And we were like doing it completely remote. We had never met. And it was during COVID, and we're like writing this. And I mean, when we finally met, I was like, oh my gosh, you're taller than I thought you were.
It was so funny. Yeah, we were doing Zoom before it was cool, is like what we like to say, because we had meetings and would talk and, about ministry stuff before the book even like came about. So, technology, God can work through that. And even Facebook, things. Like, cause that's where we connected. And I had been doing local support groups too, like through and then after me and my husband, our infertility journey. So it's just we like to think about it how like the message that you are not alone is probably like the first and foremost thing to get across to women and couples, because that's how you feel, and that's the kind of avenue that the enemy works in, of thinking like, that you no one gets you and God has abandoned you, and then it just piles on the lies. But even in this, like, God didn't have Kelley and I do this alone. Like, he partnered us together.
Goodness.
And then with the community, like we have as part of the book, like we interview lots of other women and people who have led support groups and things like that. So it's not just our voices, and that's not. It is not just our stories. It's about the community that God formed through the pain
Right.
and the grief, and made something beautiful from
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, because we need community. Like,
Absolutely.
whether it's cancer or losing a job
Mm-hmm.
or adoption or marriage, like we need community. Like we cannot do this alone, any of it. And so
That's
the
right.
more we're in isolation, the more we are burdened and lonely. And there's something beautiful about allowing your friends, your family, your people to come beside you, even if they don't get it and understand,
Yeah.
allowing them
Yeah.
and kind of showing them the pain so that they can at least hold you. I mean, Moses had people holding his arm. He had friends holding his arms up
Yes.
when the burden got too heavy. And that's what
That's
we
right.
need. I mean, I had people showing up in the pain of my grief to just sit
Mm.
with me. And there's nothing more encouraging and supportive and helpful than that.
Oh, that's so good. Such a good word. I want to come back to something that Jen just said that I think is so important to highlight, and that's the lies that women believe
Mm.
and that couples believe. And so I'm a firm believer that I agree with you completely that the enemy does everything he can to steal, kill, and destroy and to isolate us in our struggles so that he can pull us away from a faith and trust and understanding that God is still good even in the midst of it all. And so I think it's important to give voice to the lies because maybe somebody's
Mhm.
listening right now, ladies, who they don't even realize that they're believing a lie. So would you give voice to some of the lies that are common to families who are experiencing infertility?
Yeah, we talk about this in the book. Cannot even remember which chapter, Jen. But we just talk about number one, what the lies are. Number two, how to identify them and call them out and speak truth over them. But
Yeah.
lies, like we just talked about, that you're alone. Lies that it's a punishment, that it's your fault.
Right.
The lie that you're broken, that you've done something wrong, that God doesn't love you. And some of these things are even things that people try to say in love and hope and helpfulness of like, it will just happen
Yeah.
if you have enough faith. And so then you start to question your faith. And
Yeah.
I mean,
There's a lot of shame that can build up, and that can come internally through your own like doubts and insecurities, and like even
Yeah.
specific to your body, because you're like, well, God made me to do this, but it's not
Yeah.
happening. And so you feel that brokenness.
Right.
But also that kind of the external pressure, like everybody else is in this place, and it feels
mhm.
like, you go to church on Sunday and all you see is pregnant bellies and babies and children and families,
That's right.
and then you feel out of that, out of the community. And so there are so many, factors just kind of almost seeming to work against you. And you do feel
Yeah.
like we talked about that, like it being a spiritual battle as well in the midst of infertility. And, Jesus gives us the truth to overcome the lies. And it starts with, though, like identifying, yeah, what is that? And what am I feeling? And bringing that before the Lord, and saying, well, I feel like I'm being punished, but I know you love me. So what do I do with this grief and
Yeah.
feeling
Yeah.
guilt?
Yeah. That's such a good point. And it is, I mean, walking through that, and you've already talked about how it's already a
Mhm.
roller coaster from a month to month basis. And so you're already worn down emotionally, even physically, with maybe what you're trying to do with your body to try to create those optimal results, right? To
Mhm.
be able to conceive. And then on top of that, you've got the enemy just hammering you, hammering you, hammering you with the
Mhm.
accusations, with the lies, with all the things. And so you can see how easy it is for a woman to become worn down. But Kelley, you made a great point when you were talking about men who were coming to you and they were in
Yeah.
tears. Infertility doesn't just
Mhm.
affect us as women, it
Mm-mm.
affects the men as well. And so I want to ask and give you guys opportunity to speak into that as well, how it affects the men and how it affects
Mhm.
our marriages when we're walking through this exhaustive journey and roller coaster.
Yeah, our marriage is so important to highlight in this journey. So thank you because so much so that we put several chapters in here about
Mhm.
marriage in the book and something we highlight in the ministry. We have couples dinners, we have things to make sure that the men are included because when they get together and realize I'm not the only one that my wife's talking like this, or I'm not the only one carrying this heavy burden or trying to fix and help her and I can't. And, almost a little like my wife isn't the only one and I'm not the only one is so good for them. But, if we talk about that the enemy is trying to still kill and destroy our hearts and our feelings and our connection to the Lord during infertility, then he is very much after our marriage. Because if he can get our marriage, then he can get the future, what our marriage can do. He, whether that's children or not children, like that's his bigger game, in my opinion, and something I feel very strongly about. And that might be my soapbox, is if we don't take care of the marriage in infertility, you either become stronger because of your infertility and your pain and your adoption and the struggle and the waiting, or you break. And sometimes for us, it took infertility for us to get even stronger and closer, but there was some breaking before that. Some good things that needed to happen, but also some refining and some struggle. And so if we hadn't had a community of other believers and other people that were pushing us forward, and our own convictions of like, we're not going to let this get us, like we're a team, then it could have been a totally different story. I know a lot of infertility couples in previous who've now come to me years later who were like, I wish I would have known and spoke about the things that you guys are saying, because it would have made a difference in our marriage, and we don't have a marriage anymore, or whatever it may be. And, I think we give real tools is really our goal. Like, we want to be practical and we also want to be spiritual. So like how to approach intimacy, how to keep the bedroom holy, how to keep, your decision making where you're putting both of you in this, because it's a heavy burden on the men, whether we realize it or not. They feel like they need to fix us and help us, and they can't, and they don't understand, but they feel the sorrow, but they're trying to be strong. And so we talk through a lot of those things, because it is, they hide it. Right, Jen? Like they put on, for the most part, men put on this, it's going to be okay. And it's going to be all right. And, this hopefulness. And then the women get upset, I feel like, in most groups. This is typical in most groups. And they're like, why doesn't he care more? Why doesn't he feel this like this? And I just have to remind women, like, just like myself, like, we feel it so much and all the time. And they try to compartmentalize it so that it doesn't take over. And to be strong, because if, we're always the one falling apart per se, someone has to be there to hold us. And but some of the most beautiful parts of our marriage and infertility were when I said, I don't need you to be strong right now. I need you to sit in this with me. And I need to know that you feel this too. And so he let down that wall, and we would just like weep together, and not like cry, like weep. There's a difference.
Yeah. And the expectations, they're all like smashed to bits, right? Like, and you come into a marriage with expectations, and you already have to kind of work through that depending on how wide they might be of reality. But then you have this, I think everybody has an or a lot of people do. Plan. Yeah. But also that a child might fix your marriage. That is a big assumption. And like non-Christians and Christians, I feel like, have that belief that, we've got these issues in our marriage, but then once we have a kid, like somehow those will go away. I don't know. It doesn't really make sense logically, but it's still there. It persists. And then when you tighten,
and it's
because
heightened.
You're like, it's
heightened.
not happening then. When you experience infertility and then miscarriage, if that comes along too, then it's just heartbreak. So we talk about in the book and in our support groups that infertility adds on top of that, and like just exacerbates any other issues that are going on and present in a marriage relationship, but also, friendships, family members, that kind of thing. And so as we talk about in marriage, and then also just on a large scale, is that a baby isn't going to fix your problems. Like
That's
the
right.
what of your weight matters, like that you desire a child, and that's a good desire. And yet a child is not going to resolve all of your problems or all of your longings. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
I think that, but it takes time to work
Yeah.
through the disappointment and the grief, and coming to that place of saying, okay, Lord, what are you leading us to as a
Yeah.
married couple, but then also to what are you doing in my heart?
Hey families, did you know that Christian Parenting has an entire online store filled with resources created to help you confidently raise your kids to follow Jesus? And today we want to offer our podcast listeners a special 15% off discount when you use coupon code podcast2024 at checkout. Our Christian Parenting store is filled with products for both parents and kids. These resources will help you pray for your kids, walk through life's ups and downs, and develop great faith habits at home. We have everything from prayer journals for parents, family discipleship tools and activities, and a variety of books. We also have products just for your kids like devotionals and scripture-based cards to stick in their backpacks and lunchboxes. We consider it an honor to provide you and your family the resources you need to build a strong faith foundation. You can visit christianparenting.org/store to see everything that's available, and make sure to use coupon code podcast2024 at the checkout to get your 15% off your order. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a spiritual journey. It really is. And
Yeah.
otherwise, I mean, I don't know how people make it through this hard stuff. I really don't. But like
Yeah.
you were saying, whether it's infertility or adoption or whatever it may be in our stories, if we're expecting that baby to solve it and to make it all better, number one,
That's
it's not
right.
fair to that baby.
Right.
It's not fair to that
That's
child.
right.
It to put that pressure and that pain on them, because it will be on them, and they won't fill that
Yes.
void, and then
Mhm.
you'll still feel it.
Yeah.
And that's hard, which is
Yes.
why it's so important for us to take the time and to not rush ahead and not jump as fast as we can, and whatever, take your process and your plan and what the Lord's leading you to, take it slow and steady and prayerfully, because the times
So good.
I was more disappointed in myself was when my husband was saying whoa and I was rushing ahead, and then
Yes.
it caused more pain for us because we weren't grieving that first loss, or we weren't taking the time to let my body heal, or whatever it may have been, deal with,
Yeah.
take some time for our marriage, because that's what we needed.
Right.
I celebrate when I have women and couples who are like,
Mhm.
we're on a break, and not a break to be like, God's going to do it, but on a break to be like, we're fasting or we're
Yeah.
focusing on what matters here. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes.
That is so, so good. And that is the heart of it, really, because at the end of the day, throughout this journey, whatever our longing is, only the Lord is
Absolutely.
going to satisfy.
Yeah.
And that relationship with him, and everything we experience, the good, the bad, the brokenhearted, journeys that we all walk through, because this is, I mean, we live in an imperfect world. It's filled with
Mm-hmm.
sin, and we're not going to have what we long for, which
Mhm.
is heaven ultimately, and perfection and restoration. And so we've got to experience hard things, and yet ultimately the Lord is our answer. And that sounds like a Sunday school answer in the sense, but really it is. And I mean, I'll just be completely transparent with y'all. I am 41 years old, and I am the adult result of a relationship meant to fix a lifelong longing and a broken marriage. And so, like, I have grown up with that pressure, and for years as a child, and even coming into adulthood, I didn't
Mhm.
understand that that was what had been placed on me. And so I
Mhm.
can speak to that, and I can affirm that. And I have a wonderful relationship with my parents, and I love and adore them, and I'm not angry with them for that. But coming into this season of my life, and even having conversations like this, it's like an aha moment of, yes, I understand what that feels like, to have that expectation placed on me to fulfill a longing
Oh,
that was placed, by the Lord. And so thank y'all for that aha moment
Mhm.
right now in this conversation. But that's such an important thing for us to dive into, and for
mhm.
us to all be able to examine our hearts and say, what are we really
Mhm.
longing for? And if the answer at the top of the list is not the Lord, I love your advice. Pause, fast, pray, seek him, look to his word and understanding who he is, and then allowing him the time and the space to work whatever his plan is for your life. That's so good, ladies. You had talked about this a moment ago, and I want to go back to this, adding to the strain, because we've kind of talked about the individual strain, and then we've talked about the strain on the marriage, and then it kind of just creates this ripple effect and all of our relationships, because you do have people who are well-meaning, who see your struggle, who they have a lot of advice, they have a lot of spiritual comments, they have a lot of well-meaning, ways that they want to contribute to your journey. But sometimes when you're walking through this, when our hormones are elevated, when our minds and our bodies are exhausted, our nerves are raw, like all the things, right? What advice do you have for those experiencing infertility when it comes to guarding our response? Because I can feel like, we can go one of two ways. Like, we can lash out and everybody's going to be like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Or because we want people to lean in. You both have said that, right? Like, we want people to lean in and go through and feel this with us and sit with us in our hard moments. But sometimes we're a hot mess and we're just like, all of our feelings are all over the place. And so how would you advise
and they're
people who
scared to come?
Yes, absolutely. So speak into that for a moment, because like, I want to get real in this conversation. I want people to walk away from this conversation today feeling like, oh, I feel seen, I feel heard, like you've said, and I really feel like I can take this and I can apply this and grow from it.
Whew. Yes. There's so many things we could talk about with this.
So much bad advice. Yeah.
Like, the list could go on. And even, I've been in groups leading and I'm like, okay, we're going to have to stop this list because now we're getting to grumbling. And though I feel like grumbling is needed a little here, I've heard everything from like Job's friends, what have you done? To my uterus works, maybe you should just have it. Like, there is a gamut from bad to worse. And
wow.
I would say for the response, it took a long time. I think at first I was very weepy and just would explode with the emotions. I believe, let's get real here. There was a time, my husband is a dentist, and so he worked in the area that we ate out at. And there was one dinner I was losing my mind. And there was tears, and my food wasn't the way I wanted it, and it was wrong. And I wasn't being like mean or rude, but I was not a happy camper. Yeah. And enough that he felt awkward, like my husband. And I couldn't stop crying. And whether it be church, a restaurant, the coffee shop, it doesn't matter where you're at. And so much so that we both decided, he got my okay to write on the note, because he's a dentist right here in that area, and to write down like, I'm so sorry, we're going through some things. Like, because I was, a hot mess, and there's been times where, I've cried and yelled at places where I shouldn't, when someone would ask those first questions, what's your name? Do you have any kids? Because I'm at an age where I should. And, there was one time, I think, at the grocery store, and I was like, no, I don't, but I want some. Like, do you have one? It took a long time for my responses to be loving and kind. And that had to come from my heart healing, and for a place to put that. Number one, community to vent some of that to a little. And then also like a real, honest community that would also point me to good and hopeful and loving and truth. But also, like, there had to be some healing in my heart to not be so upset every time I talked about it. Like, when you go through therapy at the beginning, when you're in therapy and trauma work, like, you cry every time you talk about something. And the more you work through it, the less you cry and the less you explode and the less those feelings burst, because you're dealing with those emotions and feelings. Jenny Allen's book right now, or that's coming out, is all about knowing your emotions and your feelings. And that's something I feel like we talk about a lot, is like, if you can't know what it is, it's just going to come out, and it's not going to come out good, and it's not going to come out healthy. It's just going to explode on those people you don't want to explode on. And so we work through in the book and in our groups, just like teaching them how to have tools of like responding to people, how to respond in a healthy way, writing out some already prepared answers. So you're like good to go when those situations come up, because the last thing you want is to be blindsided, and they're going to happen constantly. You're going to be blindsided. So like, whether it's a party or meeting someone for the first time or the grocery store, if you have a snippet and then a longer one to be able to explain in your own way how to answer those basic questions, it gives you like, I got a plan. I got a game plan.
That's
and I'm not as scared. Like, I can go into this situation.
Yeah.
But I think that helps.
Like, you feel less taken aback every time, because you can't prepare for everything, but there are some the like,
no,
you know, do you have any kids question, that will come up. Or one of the great ones that I heard was, why don't you have any kids? It's not for lack of
I don't know.
Talk to
Ask the Lord for me.
So, but having that.
Do you really know how this works? I don't know. Do I?
Can you explain it to me? It's just ridiculous.
Maybe I don't.
So, right. Maybe I missed that memo. Having that prepared answer for some of those that will come, it just it kind of almost takes out of the emotions of it a little bit, because it's almost like a business, transaction. Like, you ask that and I'm going to answer with this. And hopefully that kind of shuts down any further interrogation, without getting your emotions, wound up too much in that moment. And we talk about another thing in the book, that's more pertaining to envy, and how that is so hard when you are hearing a pregnancy announcement. And that is one of the worst things for me, that I had such a hard time with that when we were going through infertility, because it's like, well, I'm happy for you. That's wonderful. Like, you're having a baby, but this is exactly what I'm hoping and praying for. And we started getting into the time where other families were having their second pregnancy announcement, and then we were getting lapped. Yeah.
We call it lapping. Yeah. They were lapping
us.
It's
so hard, and you don't want your heart to get into the place of envy, and yet it is very difficult to resist that. So something that I learned through over time and community, because a friend helped me talk through this, was to have something where you take 24 hours to journal, pray, talk with a trusted friend, get some of those emotions out, because the first response is out of grief, because
you're happy for them, but sad for yourself.
Sad for you, and sometimes you just need to cry, and then let that through. But then after the 24 hours, not that you're going to be done being sad, however, you might have some perspective, you sleep on it. And you say, you know what? What can I do in this situation? I can still thank God for creating life. I can still, you bring it back to the Lord. Yes, this hurts, but it's not just about me. It's about God is the author of life. And I don't know that woman's situation. Well, I mean, in some cases you might know them, but at the very least you can say, I thank God for this child, while I'm still praying for my own. So that is another kind of practical approach to dealing with not the unsolicited advice, or but also some of the hard things that come up very commonly. Everyone who's been through infertility struggles with this in particular.
Yeah, the announcements. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and it's only natural. And I love that. This very practical advice to allow yourself the space to process the feelings that are inevitable, to not stuff it or to give your own self more
Right.
grief on top of what you're already experiencing, and like shaming yourself and trying to, overly spiritualize that. And yes, we ultimately, it all comes back to, we need to surrender that to the Lord. But he gave us feelings and he gave us emotions. And so I think when we're submitting those back to him and when we're sitting with those with him, then that is a healthy space to be able to do that. So that's really, really practical. And I appreciate that. I think that's a great takeaway for this conversation. Now, I want to get to a part of the conversation related to foster care and adoption, because y'all both talked about this. You both have experience with this. So I want to lean into that a little bit. There's so many different ways that we could go with this conversation. And with comments, as we were just talking about, people like, well, if you can't have kids of your own, then there's lots of kids who need a home. Just go that route, And as we've talked about, and as our listeners know, this is obviously a big passion of mine, at that we don't need to step into adoption unless the Lord specifically calls us to do so. We don't need to step into foster care unless the Lord specifically calls us to do so. So I would love for y'all to both take a moment just to share a little bit of your own experience with adoption specifically, and how that ties to our conversation today.
Yeah, we do have a chapter in the book just talking about considering adoption, and all of the emotions and decisions and things that are, and that call, like you said, Summer, like the call to adopt. For us personally, me and my husband, so we, our oldest son, we welcomed him through adoption, and as a newborn, and we were paired, matched with a birth mother, and it was like overnight situation. So we got the call, we had nothing.
Wow.
We went and to pick him up and became parents overnight. So it was a whirlwind. But for us, when I talk to other couples who are thinking about adoption, coming from the place of infertility, I try to say that, okay, so our situation, we knew we wanted to adopt before we even experienced infertility. Some couples may be like that.
Yeah.
I think the majority who are going through infertility, the adoption piece was not considered until they encountered difficulty conceiving. And so it's going to be, and every story is unique. Every journey is going to be different. But that part of it is like, how are you even approaching adoption? Where are you coming from? And that matters in terms of your heart and your desires. And God is in the business of changing desires. So if you don't even have, I have known women and men, like, and they have a variety of, feelings about it. God can transform our desires, and praise him for that, because sometimes our desires aren't for the right thing, but for a child, that's good. And it's specific, though, to adoption. Like, wanting a biological child is different than wanting to adopt a child. And so
that's right.
And in the book, I interviewed a friend of mine who has this great line about how adoption resolves your infertility because it fulfills your desire for a child and becoming a parent. And it does not, fulfill having a biological child. And you shouldn't feel guilt over that, because God gave us, I think, women and men, but especially women, having that, we have biological clocks. Like, there's that innate drive to conceive and carry. And so there's a part of that. It's a process of coming to the decision of even thinking about adoption. And
just adopt is not.
There's no.
There's nothing just about it.
No, there is not.
Yeah. I think we hear so often, and we know that, God's heart is for adoption and is for the orphan. But that does not mean that every one of us is supposed to go there. And I think the church and people around us will band-aid that. We'll be like, this will solve this for you. This will make this all better. This will give that answer. But like we talked about earlier, that answer is not that simple. And that answer and that Band-Aid has things underneath it, and wounds and pain and scars and blood. And if we don't work on healing that first, it can never be a Band-Aid. Like adoption can never Band-Aid anything. And we wanted to adopt when we came into marriage. We just didn't know and what God's timing would be for that. And so our story is kind of funny because I rushed through this gamut of infertility stuff and testing and different procedures, and, overstimulated in our first year. And they were like, you could do IVF tomorrow. And I was like, had to pray, and we're at Valentine's Day dinner, and the Lord was like, no, like, you don't have the financial provision for that. Granted, we could have called a few people and they would have provided right away, but we thought that was taking it into our own hands because we had just our, tax return, which would have been the exact amount, was like 2 weeks late. We didn't know why. We just bought our first car like 2 weeks prior. And we were like, okay, like, God lined all that up. He is in the business of details. He would have taken care of this, and he knew. Anyway, they let us redo it because it was their fault, and at no cost to us. So we tried IUI again, and had heartbreak again. And then after that, I was like, at some point I was like, I'm ready. Like, let's start heading towards adoption. And we started putting money away, and like, you just know God's timing by the way he's moving and working. And we put money away and all these crazy things, and we're starting to fill out paperwork. And my husband was like, I think we should still try. And I wasn't listening to him. And then a car broke and crazy computer things. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's all our money for adoption. Like, it was a lot. And I was like, okay, so maybe we do need to try again. And then I got pregnant, and like, we ended up losing that baby. But the Lord's timing and all that was just like, it is not your time to adopt. And I kept stepping and I kept trying and like wasn't getting the hint, but he was so patient with me. And 2 miracle sons later that like didn't even know it was possible because doctors told me it wasn't, without help. And then we waited 2.5 years for adoption. Like, we were a waiting family for a long time, to the point where my boys and my husband and I were like, maybe this dream's over. Like, maybe we're, like, maybe we're getting too old, or maybe this isn't right. And sure enough, he was like, no, I'm going to do it once your book baby's done. And so the book baby was done. And that same weekend, he was like, here's a birth profile, and this one's for sure yours. And not for sure, but like, we read it and we were like, this is us. This is ours. And it just took a while, but
that's so amazing.
You never know what God's doing. And the more we like lean in and allow ourselves to trust and to give him those desires, and that pain and those aches, the more he's able to show us how he's working too. I think we miss some of that because in our plans, we don't include him. Like, if we're relying on him and putting all of our faith and our trust and, sitting in that chair that can only hold us by salvation, like, if we are really there, hands open, then he's directing that. And our plans will either move forward or they won't. And you'll either know it's a right or a left, or whatever it may be, as you're looking to him and gaining his wisdom and insight and knowing to pause when it's supposed to pause.
Yeah. Oh, such a good word. I love that. In church yesterday, one of the things that I wrote down, we're going through the book of Exodus right now, and it was something to the effect of, God is already orchestrating the pieces to answer a prayer that you haven't even uttered yet. And so that just made me, as you're explaining that, Kelley, that was what I was picturing and just going back to, because I can share in that. I think you and I have very similar personalities in that I just push. Like once I made up my mind we were going to go after adoption, it was like I was obsessed with the paperwork. It was blinders on. I was going to do it all. I was going to push doors open that the Lord was clearly
Not
keeping
doing.
closed for
Yeah.
a reason. Yes, absolutely. And so, I mean, our listeners know my story, but just to share with y'all, I mean, we went through 9 processes in 10 years and only one successful placement. Just to, and we tried processes literally all over the world, gave our hearts to children all over the world that never get to call me mom. And so that was a different journey for me. And very much grief and loss in those children that I thought I was going to get to parent and love in that way. And so I can relate to that on so many levels of just trusting in his plan and his timing. And I love coming to kind of a little bit of a close of our conversation. You know, both of y'all, the Lord has fulfilled the longing in both of your lives that we've talked about today. And you have precious little lives that call you mama now. And so I want to celebrate that and maybe give y'all a moment to speak to the reward that came on the other side of the hard and the journey.
Being a mom is sweet. But I think it's also, I balance this because I speak with women all day long who don't necessarily want to hear that word. And that word has a lot of pain to it. And so it's the sweetest word. I mean, I'm fighting with my husband of what my 7-month-old is going to say first. You know, like mama. He doesn't say mama, but he's probably going to say dada. But
they usually do.
Yeah. Mama. And, but it's not the only word, and it's not the most important word we hear. And so I think when I started to realize that the word daughter and beloved from my maker and my king and my Lord were sweeter, that my Father called me beloved and calls me his daughter, when I realized those were more important than me hearing a mama.
So good.
My heart was different. And
so good,
because at the end of the day, being a mom is wonderful, but it's sanctifying and it's rough and it's a mirror, just like marriages, of your own sin and your own selfishness and your own junk. And we're in a hard season right now, and I'm like, they say this is supposed to be fun. So to get through those moments on this side, if I hadn't had infertility to refine me and desire for me to need the Lord, want the Lord, and to be his daughter, I don't know. Because I had some bad examples to follow. So
yeah,
that's really good.
Well, yeah, and both of us are boy moms, and both of us had the desires.
We're a different breed.
The desires fulfilled for biological children that God, enabled miraculously, but also for our desire for adoption and experiencing that. And like with my oldest, we have a wonderful relationship with his birth mother that I cherish. And so there's so many things that came about like through infertility that I thank God for, that I wouldn't have said that at the beginning, like not knowing what was ahead. And I agree with Kelley, and I think it took like the fulfillment of those desires for me to see like what we talked about earlier, that's good, and we praise God for fulfilling the desires, and that's not ultimate. Like Kelley said, with being a mom, like having a child is wonderful. It's a blessing. It is not the ultimate thing that we need in life. That can only be Christ. And it was like through infertility and then motherhood that I realized, like, well, I mean, I knew motherhood was going to be hard, but when you're in it, you're like, wow, this really is, difficult, and that it's not all the dream, world that you envision when you're in infertility, and kind of probably with rose-colored glasses because that's what you hope for. But it was through both those things, infertility and motherhood, that I had to see like the challenges. No, it's like, Jesus, you are who I need most. And and then bringing that back to like the wounds of infertility, and like if can a biological child fulfill that? Can adoption fulfill that? Well, yes, and ultimately no, though. Only the Lord is our, He is our portion. And so,
That's
um,
right.
Yeah, and that will carry you whether you
yeah,
don't have a story like ours. Whether we write about this in the book, we really struggled with the title of
yep,
what childlessness it would be. And we have some great
hmm
stories in there from women who have
yeah,
stepped into that and are, owning their stories and
Mm.
grieving and also
hmm
celebrating in some ways. It's been a
Yeah.
journey for them, but we decided to call it Different Can Be Beautiful because
Mm.
it was just like we knew it needed to be something that spoke to what was really
hmm
happening in their hearts, that it's
Yeah.
different than what they thought, and
Yeah.
and it's not the way they want it to be, but it can be beautiful
hmm
if they allow it to
hmm
do that in their hearts.
because they
So
still have
good.
Jesus,
I love
like
that.
it's what's the common
Yeah,
thread through all of
Yes.
this? Like, whatever the outcome of your journey, you will still have Jesus. And so
That's right.
yeah, that's the consistency through our waiting and beyond is, we can be thankful that we are
Yeah.
held by Him.
yeah,
Yeah,
that he really is
absolutely.
our only hope.
That's exactly right. That's as I'm thinking about this, you sharing that, Jen, the
hmm
song Jireh, You
Yes.
Are Enough.
Mm,
That, I mean, that's on loop right now in my house right now. Just again, and it's a very popular praise and worship song. I believe it's Elevation, and I mean that's such a good thing to just pray over your home, pray over your mind, pray over your heart.
mhm,
Like,
hmm
You are enough. And at the end of the day, just reminding ourselves as we go through these journeys, and whether you're waiting to conceive, whether you are waiting to see adoption
hmm
fulfilled, whether you are waiting for God just to move and direct you in
Right.
whatever path He wants you to go on, reminding ourselves He is
hmm
enough and that He is faithful. He doesn't want to leave us in the desert. He will guide us through and He will
mm,
show us the way. And there is so much good as you're
hmm
coming through this particular
hmm
journey. So, Kelley, Jenn, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I am so grateful for your wisdom, for your ministry. I want to make sure that our listeners, if they are experiencing or have experienced infertility as a part of their story and would like to learn more from your resources and connect with you in community, how can they do that?
yeah, I would go to waitingandhopeinfertility.com. I would also order the book because it's what we would have wanted
hmm
to have on our own. Like that's why we wrote it. We're like, we need something in their
hmm
hands that will walk them through what we would have wanted when we were going
Mm-hmm.
through it.
When we were going through it, there was
Yeah.
like one Christian book
Maybe.
that I can remember with like a yellow cover. And now there are more resources available, but it was like, shouldn't there be more out there? Like God's word even speaks about infertility, and
Right.
yet there was like nothing available. So,
Mm.
and He made a way for this book to happen, and we're just so like in awe of that. But that was our heart, to have something that we wish we could have had,
Yeah.
Yeah.
when we felt so
Yeah.
alone.
And then
Yes,
for
I can
daily
completely relate to
encouragement,
that.
our content team does awesome on social media, and we have tons of things you can binge on the website from blogging and different things. And yeah, and there's an online community. If you need to get into a support group and there's not one near you,
Mhm,
join that. It's going all the time.
That's
mhm.
fantastic. Okay. I'm going to make sure, friends, to have all of those links in today's show notes. So if you've just been particularly impacted by this conversation, please head over to the show notes and connect with Jenn and Kelley and everything that's going on at Waiting and Hope. I love that you stepped up and answered the Lord's calling to serve others in the midst of your own journeys. And it has just been a blessing getting to know you and speak with you today. Thank you so much for being my guests.
Thank you, Summer.
Thanks, Summer.
Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.